Mexican president said he was ready to request a referendum on charging former presidents with corruption if activists fail to collect enough signatures calling for such a vote. United Nations General Assembly opened its 75th session, chaired by the Turkish diplomat Volkan Bozkır. Over 2 million people in the Central African Republic live in a situation of acute food insecurity. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Laura Palmeiro. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said he was ready to request a referendum of charging former presidents with corruption if activists fail to collect enough signatures calling for such a vote. In his morning press briefing at the National Palace, López Obrador recalled that the deadline to collect 1.6 million signatures expires this Tuesday. So as the request occurs to call for a referendum and revealed that about half of that total has been collected so far. He strongly believed that this specific measure should be reviewed since a very high amount of figures is required to collect in a very short time. In other words, he said, in any case, there will be a request for the referendum on prosecuting former presidents with evidence of corruption in their respective terms. In Peru, according to local media, the former secretary of President Martín Vizcarra, Karen Roca Luque, illegally recorded conversations at the head of state. The conversations were held between Roca and her lawyer, Fabio Noriega. In one of the experts, she talks about the recordings of the audios, and in others, she would have stated that she received messages from Congressman Edgar Alarcón, president of the Auditioning Commission. Last Friday, Karen Roca denied to be the author of the recordings of the audios broadcasted in Congress and relating President Martín Vizcarra with the Richard Swing case. The head of state announced on Monday that the presidential office had decided to cut all ties with Karen Roca. Honduras is dealing with another political crisis after the National Electoral Council called for the 2021 elections without having a new electoral law. The National Electoral Council, made up of three main political forces, called the primary elections for March 14, 2021. The candidates will be elected for 4 electoral levels: presidential, municipal mayors, deputies of the National Congress, and the Central American Parliament. That will be the process prior to general elections scheduled for November 27, 2020. Such regulations aim to avoid electoral fraud, such as the one registered in 2017, which favored the current president, Juan Orlando Hernández. El Salvador's international airport will require a negative COVID-19 test from travelers arriving as of next Saturday, when the air terminal will be reopened. The Autonomous Executive Port Commission informed the airlines flying to El Salvador that it will require a test carried out in the last 72 hours prior to the flight, and it must be negative in order to enter the country. This statement specified that the General Directorate of Immigration and the Foreigners will declare inadmissible the passenger who arrives without the aforementioned exam, with a certification from the laboratory where it was carried out. El Salvador entered its second phase of economic opening on August 24 without the new cases of COVID-19 skyrocketing significantly. Bolivia's plurinational electoral body made official the biosecurity measures that will govern in the country during the general elections planned for October 18th, aimed to prevent new COVID-19 cases. Among the 7 provisions adopted, the most outstanding ones to avoid crowds are new spaces for voting, the prohibition of commercial activities in 100 meters around the polling station, and the extension of the working hours of those polling stations. The age of 50 was also set as a limit for those working at polling stations and other activities related to the process. According to the electoral body, the day face mask and protective glasses will be mandatory, as well as other means and biosafety supplies. Experts have recorded so far over 7,000 deaths from COVID-19, and the elections will take place almost a year after the coup against Morales' government, interrupting the process of change in the country. President Sebastián Piñera's proposal on the way of the new Chilean constitution should be drawn up has raised debates and criticism by the opposition, which has described it as more of the same. Chilean media reported that last week the president circulated among his ministers a 3-page document that contains 10 items that, according to him, are essential to draw up a democratic constitution for all Chileans. Apparently, after listening to the criteria of experts close to the presidency, Piñera submitted this sort of decalogue, elaborating some issues that he had pointed out when he referred to the possible content of the Constitution in December 2019, when he called for the plebiscite. Álvaro Elizalde, president of the Socialist Party, noted that it is time to listen to citizens instead of presidents. Also, the Democratic Revolution president Catalina Pérez underlined that rather than a list of generalities, we need to know whether the president and his sector will stop hindering the changes that our country really needs. The development of the food industry in Cuba constitutes today one of the main priorities of the economic and social strategy in the face of the global crisis generated by the COVID-19 pandemic. According to a document circulated by the Ministry of Economy and Planning, the development of the food industry has a vital importance for Cuba. Cuba is an agricultural country and needs to guarantee both the food for the population while continuing a path for development. According to this printed and circulated document, change in the way this sector is managed is urgent for bolstering agribusiness. To achieve so, it will be necessary to take advantage of existing technologies in joint ventures depending on the priorities of food production in the country. And as the police demonstrate in Haiti's capital, students in Jeremie in the southwest of Jacmel in the southeast also demanded teachers for their schools a month after the resumption of the course. Hundreds of students marched through the streets of Jeremie, downtown of the Grand Anse department, to demand, in addition, better quality in public education, which represents only 20% of the education system. Meanwhile, in Jacmel, about 90 kilometers southeast of Port-au-Prince, teachers joined protesters to demand salary adjustments. Several state and passenger transport vehicles were set on fire in Port-au-Prince, and heavily armed officers gave the government an ultimatum for the release of their colleagues from prison. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. This Tuesday, the United Nations General Assembly opened its 75th session, chaired by the Turkish diplomat Volkan Bozkır, and in the framework of the COVID-19 pandemic that is affecting the whole world. Bosquet stated that a key issue during this term will be the protection of vulnerable communities and people. The Turkish diplomat also said that the pandemic poses many challenges. Bosquet pointed out that the pandemic is testing our institutions as never before and that they have a duty to take effective worldwide actions to overcome the novel coronavirus and the havoc it wreaks in economies and societies. For the first time in its history, the general debate of the Assembly next week will be held virtually due to the COVID-19 restrictions. Russia prepares to begin clinical trials of a live COVID-19 vaccine under the supervision of health professionals. The announcement was made on Tuesday after a meeting of Russian specialists at the Russian Academy of Science. According to observations made by foreign colleagues, scientists and doctors stated that those who were infected with COVID-19 could continue to spread the virus for up to 48 days. They highlighted that the known data of COVID-19 are insufficient. This is still unknown, making the vaccine for the novel coronavirus even more necessary. The Chinese government stated that the EU observers are free to visit Xinjiang, the northwestern region where Beijing is accused of mistreating the indigenous ethnic Uyghur population. According to a spokesperson from the Foreign Ministry, China is willing to make arrangements but opposes investigation based on the assumption of guilt.
The EU and member states have raised their desire to visit Xinjiang. China has already agreed and is willing to make arrangements. The ball is now in the EU court. China opposes investigations based on the assumption of guilt.
And the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson also said U.S. ban on Xinjiang cotton violates international trade guidelines and is outright bullying.
The U.S. has used the so-called forced labor issue as a pretext to take restrictive measures against Chinese companies. This violates international trade guidelines, damages the global industrial supply and value chains. This act is outright bullying. China firmly opposes this. Some people in the U.S. on one hand repeatedly claim to care about Xinjiang ethnic minorities, but on the other hand take various measures to suppress Xinjiang companies. This fully reveals the hypocrisy and the sinister intentions of these U.S. people who want to curb Xinjiang's development and stir up ethnic relations in China.
The World Health Organization said that all of Africa's 54 countries have expressed interest in a global effort to ensure the coronavirus vaccine distributed equally to rich and poorer countries. The World Health Organization COVID-19 Vaccines Global Access Facility, or COVAX, aims to secure at least 220 million doses for the African continent of 1.3 billion people. More than 170 countries have expressed its support to this multilateral effort, with the goal of securing 2 billion vaccine doses by the end of 2021, so countries can meet the needs of at least 20% of their populations, starting with health workers and vulnerable populations.
There is a vaccine that is licensed and approved. COVAX will work to secure at least 220 million doses of vaccine for the continent. This will not necessarily cover all the needs of the continent, but at least will cover 20% of the African population, initially prioritizing those who are at the front line, the healthcare workers, then expanding to cover vulnerable groups such as the elderly or those with a pre-existing condition.
COVAX's overall objective is to secure in the region of 2 billion doses of vaccine by the end of 2021, and to ensure that countries can meet the needs of at least 20% of their populations. And as Richard described, that is to target the populations at greatest risk of acquiring the disease, the healthcare workers, as well as those at the greatest risk of having severe illness and to prevent death.
Christine Ramson, editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, said on day 6 of Julian Assange's extradition hearing that Assange's trial is a political one.
Let me get back to the testimony this morning from Mr. Eric Lewis. He pointed out the obvious and stated it in very, very certain terms of how political this case is, something that has obviously been trying to be denied by the opposition. But as Mr. Eric Lewis said this morning, nothing has changed since the Obama era. We have the same witnesses, the same facts. There has nothing been added to it. What has been added, you got a new president and the people around him, especially William Barr, the Attorney General, which took a totally different approach. And there is evidence, and of course, if you read the press in the United States, it is well known that the Justice Department has been politicized. So this is a political trial. Let me get...
Providing evidence on Monday, lawyer Eric Lewis told the Old Bailey that this administration's decision to prosecute Mr. Assange is entirely in keeping with its numerous decisions to implement policy on the basis of President Trump's concerns with his own image and protecting it, through the use of power of prosecution and imprisonment to further Trump's agenda. Assange could face 175 years in prison if convicted of all charges. British Employment Minister Mims Davis predicted on Tuesday a few bumpy months ahead as a furlough scheme that kept thousands on payrolls draws to a close next month.
We've had the broad brush approach and we've got our plan for jobs, and that's protecting, creating and securing new jobs, also helping those growing sectors, so more jobs are available in digital, in green technologies, and we're absolutely working with the construction industry. If you look at HS2, thousands of new jobs coming along there. So absolutely there are sectors growing and thriving. There will be sectors that will take longer to come back, but we've already helped with the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. I don't think this government is afraid of supporting where we can. Obviously we've got the fiscal events where the Chancellor can start to look at that going forward, and we are hearing from the opposition about needing a plan for jobs. We've already got it. The reality is in January we have to have a free trade agreement or a backup plan which we are securing through this bill. This is the first time in 45 years that we've been able to start to look at our internal market. I think you'll see different debates throughout the week and through the committee stage, but I am determined that we do something that is right for the whole of the country, and that's really battle for that free trade agreement with the EU. We're in a pandemic, they need to work with us, we need to work with them. I'd be delighted if we could get that through. That will be, as Employment Minister, what supports jobs and livelihoods.
And we have more news coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. According to a report published by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, over 2 million people, about half of the population of the Central African Republic, live in a situation of acute food insecurity. Food products are almost non-existent at the markets, and even the most widely consumed cassava flour, sold at low price, is missing from the local groceries. The growing security instability in the region prevents people from going to the fields to fetch food supplies. Humanitarian workers are doing their best to distribute food to a population frightened by the strong presence of armed groups. In addition, training of agricultural monitors on the simplest farming techniques has been put in place in order to be able to feed the communities. The International Committee of the Red Cross President Peter Maurer visited a health center in the Kaya district of Burkina Faso. It is clear that there are enormous problems when all of a sudden a community grows by a factor of 3 or 4, he said. Kaya, the capital of Center North region, has been overwhelmed with a massive influx of people forced to flee their homes by the jihadist insurgency. More than 1,000 people have lost their lives and over 1 million have been displaced in the violence since 2015. And the bloodshed is stretching already slimmed resources in the country's CHILE north. Kaya has been largely spared from the violence, but 400,000 people have taken refuge in the area around the city since January last year.
The purpose of my visit to Kaya is really to get to know the humanitarian problems in the region, especially the impacts of the displacements that have taken place, especially in recent years, to see what the pressures on healthcare are, what are the pressures on health centers, but also how the ICRC, with other partners, with the authorities in the regions and other partners, have been able to respond to these pressures, and how we can maintain health care.
Bahraini Foreign Minister Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Sayani arrives at the White House Tuesday to be part of an historic diplomatic deal with Israel and United Arab Emirates. President Donald Trump will host more than 700 guests Tuesday on the south lawn of the witness to sealing of the agreements between Israel and the two Gulf Arab nations. Trump and his allies hope the occasion will burnish Trump's credentials as a peacemaker at the height of his reflection campaign. Even though the COVID-19 pandemic is still hitting Russia, with more than 5,000 cases a day, cultural spaces are reopening, such in the case of the ballet season of the Bolshoi Theater. A tribute to the health workers who are fighting the pandemic is the best way to resume the long-awaited season of one of the most famous ballet companies around the world. With these beautiful images, we finish this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our web, telesurenglish.net. Join us on social media. For TeleSUR English, I'm Laura Palmeiro. Thank you for watching.